My name is Robert Hayes, and at 67 years old, I thought I knew everything there was to know about my family. After 43 years of marriage and raising 2 children in our suburban home in Denver, Colorado, I believed the worst surprises were behind us. I was wrong. It was a crisp October evening in 2024, the kind where the golden aspen leaves danced outside our kitchen window and the smell of wood smoke drifted from neighbors' fireplaces. My wife Margaret had been gone for 8 months now. Cancer took her last February, and the house felt too big, too quiet, too full of memories. My son David, 34 years old and recently divorced, had moved back in with me 3 months ago. "Just until I get back on my feet, Dad," he'd said, carrying his suitcases up to his old bedroom like a defeated teenager. I was grateful for the company, honestly. The silence had been deafening since Margaret's funeral. That particular evening, David had cooked dinner, spaghetti carbonara, something he'd learned from his ex-wife Jessica during their 7-year marriage. We ate in the dining room, using Margaret's good china because she always said, "What are we saving it for?" The irony wasn't lost on me that we were finally using it after she was gone. "Dad," David said, twirling pasta around his fork, "I've been thinking about getting my own place again. Maybe something downtown, closer to work." My heart sank, though I tried not to show it. David worked as a software engineer for a tech company in Denver's Lodo district. Good job, good money, but the divorce had cleaned him out financially and emotionally. "You don't have to rush," I said, cutting my chicken into smaller pieces. "This house is too big for one person anyway." "I know, but I can't live with my dad forever. I'm 34, for Christ's sake." "Language," I said automatically, though Margaret wasn't there to be offended anymore. David smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in weeks. "Sorry, Dad. Old habits." After dinner, we cleaned up together, falling into the rhythm we'd established over the past months. David washed, I dried, the kitchen window faced west, and the sunset painted everything in warm orange light. For a moment it felt normal, like a real home again. "I'm going out for a while," David announced, hanging up the dish towel. "Meeting some friends at Jake's Bar. Don't wade up." Jake's Bar was a dive on Colfax Avenue, where David had been spending more and more evenings lately. I worried about him drinking too much. The divorce had hit him hard, and alcohol seemed to be his primary coping mechanism. "Drive carefully," I said, "and David, maybe take it easy tonight." He looked at me with those brown eyes he'd inherited from Margaret. "I'm fine, Dad. Just need to get out of the house, you know." I knew the house held too many memories for both of us. After David left, I settled into my recliner in the living room with a cup of coffee and the Denver Post. The house creaked around me, those familiar settling sounds that become more noticeable when you're alone. Outside, I could hear the Johnson's dog barking and the distant hum of traffic on Hampton Avenue. That's when I remembered the camera. Earlier that day, I'd been experimenting with the new security camera system David had installed for me last month. "Dad, you need to be more careful living alone," he'd insisted. "These cameras will give you peace of mind." The system included cameras for the front door, back door, and one in the living room kitchen area. "Just in case," David had said. I'd been trying to figure out how to review the footage on my iPad, and I'd accidentally left the living room camera recording. The little red light was still blinking on the device, mounted discreetly in the corner near the ceiling. Should I turn it off? David would be out for hours. But then I thought about what he'd said about getting his own place, about moving out and leaving me alone again. Maybe if I watched the recording later, I could see how we interacted during dinner, see if there were signs I'd missed about how he was really feeling. It seemed harmless enough. Just a father trying to understand his son better. I left the camera on. Around 10 o'clock, I headed upstairs to my bedroom. The house felt different without Margaret. Emptier, colder somehow. I'd kept her side of the bed exactly as she'd left it. Her reading glasses still on the nightstand, her book still bookmarked at page 247 of that romance novel she'd never finished. I took my blood pressure medication. Dr. Martinez had warned me about stress and grief affecting my health, and settled into bed with a biography of Theodore Roosevelt that Margaret had bought me for Christmas last year. She'd always encouraged my interest in history, saying it kept my mind sharp. But I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts kept drifting to David, to his plans to move out, to the loneliness that would return when he left, and to that camera still recording downstairs. Around 11:30, I heard David's truck pull into the driveway. The front door opened and closed, and I heard his footsteps on the hardwood floor. Good, he was home safe. But instead of heading straight upstairs to bed as he usually did, I heard him moving around in the kitchen, probably getting a glass of water or maybe some aspirin. David often came home with headaches after his nights out. I dozed off sometime after midnight. The Roosevelt biography splayed across my chest. The next morning, I woke early as I always did. Old habits from 40 years of getting up for work at the aerospace company where I'd been an engineer. David's truck was still in the driveway, so I knew he was sleeping off whatever he'd consumed the night before. I made coffee and toast, ate breakfast alone while reading the morning news on my iPad. The camera system app was right there on the home screen, and curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see our dinner conversation from last night, see if I could glean any insights into David's state of mind. I opened the app and selected the living room camera from the previous evening. The footage began at 6:47 p.m., showing David and me sitting down to dinner. I fast-forwarded through our meal, watching our conversation in silent, sped-up motions. We looked like any father and son sharing a quiet dinner, nothing remarkable, nothing that revealed David's inner turmoil. I was about to turn off the footage when I noticed the timestamp, 11:34 p.m. David had come home. I slowed the playback to normal speed. There he was, walking into the living room. But he wasn't alone. A woman followed him inside. Tall, blonde, wearing a tight black dress and heels that clicked on our hardwood floor. She looked to be in her 40s, well-dressed, attractive. I'd never seen her before in my life. My first thought was relief. David was dating again. Maybe he was getting over Jessica, moving on with his life. That would be good for him. But then I saw how she was dressed, how she moved, how she looked around our living room like she was evaluating real estate. And I saw how David was acting, nervous, almost furtive, checking his watch repeatedly. They spoke briefly, though the camera had no audio. Then David disappeared into the kitchen and returned with something in his hand. Money. He handed her what looked like several bills. My stomach dropped. The woman counted the money, nodded, and then began removing her dress. Right there in my living room. In the house where I'd raised my children, where Margaret and I had celebrated 43 anniversaries, where family photos lined the mantelpiece and my granddaughter's artwork hung on the refrigerator. I wanted to stop watching, but I couldn't. I sat frozen in my kitchen chair, coffee growing cold in my hands, as I watched my son engage with a prostitute in my family home. They moved to the couch, Margaret's favorite couch, where she'd read bedtime stories to David and his sister Emily when they were small. The woman was professional, efficient. David was awkward, almost mechanical. There was no intimacy, no emotion. Just a transaction being completed. The whole encounter lasted maybe 20 minutes. Afterward, David walked her to the door, handed her more money, and she left. He stood in the living room for a long moment, looking around like he was seeing it for the first time, then turned off the lights and went upstairs. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the frozen frame on my iPad, feeling like someone had punched me in the gut. This wasn't my son. This wasn't the David I'd raised, the boy who'd brought home stray cats and cried when we had to put down our family dog. This wasn't the young man who'd graduated summa cum laude from Colorado State, who'd married his college sweetheart in our backyard, who'd been so excited about starting a family with Jessica. But it was David, and he was paying for sex in my living room while I slept upstairs, oblivious to what was happening under my own roof. Questions flooded my mind. How long had this been going on? Was this why he stayed out so late? Was this what he was spending his money on instead of saving for his own apartment? And why here? Why bring her to our family home? I thought about Margaret, about how devastated she would be if she knew. She'd always been so proud of David, so convinced he'd bounce back from the divorce stronger than ever. He's got good values, she'd always said. We raised him right. Had we? Where had we gone wrong? Where had I gone wrong? I heard movement upstairs. David was awake. I quickly closed the camera app and tried to compose myself, but my hands were shaking. When David came down to the kitchen 15 minutes later, showered and dressed for work, I could barely look at him. "Morning, Dad," he said, pouring himself coffee. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I managed. He looked tired, older somehow than his 34 years. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before the divorce, a heaviness in his movements that spoke of deeper troubles than I'd realized. "You okay?" he asked, and for a moment he sounded like the concerned son I thought I knew. "You look pale." "Just tired," I lied. David grabbed a banana and his laptop bag. "I'll probably be late tonight, big project at work." Another lie, I assumed. "Don't cook for me." "Okay," I said to his retreating form. After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen, looking around at the home Margaret and I had built together. 43 years of marriage, 2 children raised with love and what we thought were solid values. And this is where we'd ended up. David paying for sex while his father slept upstairs, both of us lying to each other, both of us lost without Margaret to hold our family together. I spent the day trying to process what I'd seen, trying to figure out how to handle it. Should I confront David directly? Should I pretend I never saw it? Should I seek help from someone, a therapist, our pastor, David's sister Emily? By evening, I'd made a decision. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen, but I also couldn't just blurt it out. I needed to understand why. I needed to know how my son had gotten to this point, what pain or desperation had driven him to make these choices. I decided to watch the camera footage from other nights to see if this was a pattern or an isolated incident. I dreaded what I might find, but I had to know the truth. The truth, as I would soon discover, was far worse than anything I could have imagined. The following evening, David announced he was going out again. Same routine, dinner together, clean up, then meeting friends at Jake's bar. This time, I was prepared. I made sure the living room camera was recording and went upstairs earlier than usual, claiming I was tired. But instead of going to bed, I sat in the dark in Margaret's sewing room, which had a window overlooking the driveway. I wanted to see when David came home and if he brought anyone with him. The waiting was torture. I found myself praying, something I hadn't done much since Margaret's funeral, that the previous night had been an aberration. Maybe David had made a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment during a particularly low point. Maybe it wouldn't happen again. At 11:47 p.m., David's truck pulled into the driveway. My heart sank when I saw a second figure get out of the passenger side. Another woman, this one brunette, younger looking, wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look almost like a college student. I watched them walk to the front door together, and 20 minutes later, she left alone. David had given her money. I could see the transaction clearly from my vantage point at the window. This was a pattern. Over the next week, I developed an awful routine. Each night David went out, I'd wait at the window and watch the camera footage the next morning. 4 more women in 7 days. Different ages, different looks, but the same transaction each time. Money for sex in my living room while I tried to sleep upstairs. The worst part wasn't just what David was doing, it was how methodical it had become. He had their phone numbers programmed into his phone. He knew which nights to call whom. He'd developed preferences, routines, even what appeared to be a rating system based on how much money he paid different women. My son had become a regular customer in some underground economy I didn't even know existed. On Friday morning, after watching footage of David with yet another woman, this one barely old enough to drink, with track marks on her arms that made my heart break for someone else's child, I made a decision. I had to talk to someone. Emily. David's younger sister, 31 years old, lived in Portland with her husband and 2 kids. She was a therapist, specialized in addiction counseling. If anyone could help me understand what was happening to David and how to help him, it would be Emily. I called her during my lunch break, sitting in the backyard where Margaret used to tend her roses. "Dad," Emily's voice was bright, cheerful. "This is a nice surprise. How are you doing?" I paused, not sure how to begin. "Emily, I need to talk to you about David." Her tone immediately changed. "What's wrong? Is he okay?" "I don't know. I think he's in trouble." "What kind of trouble?" I told her about the women, about the money, about what I'd been witnessing night after night in our family home. Emily listened without interrupting, but I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I described the youngest woman, the one with the track marks. "Oh, Dad," she whispered when I finished, "how long has this been going on?" "I don't know. I only started noticing it this week, but I thought about David's behavior over the past 3 months, his late nights, his secretiveness about money, his reluctance to look for his own apartment. Maybe since he moved back in. Maybe longer. This is serious, Dad. This isn't just about divorce recovery or grief. This sounds like sex addiction, and if he's seeking out women who are obviously struggling with drug addiction..." She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. David wasn't just hurting himself. He was potentially contributing to someone else's destruction. "What should I do?" I asked. "You have to confront him, but not alone, and not when you're angry. Dad, people with sex addiction often have deep shame about their behavior. If you approach this wrong, he'll just get better at hiding it. Will you help me?" "Of course. But first, you need to document everything, times, dates, descriptions. If we're going to get David help, we need him to understand the scope of what's happening. And Dad, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this is just the tip of the iceberg." Emily was right. Over the weekend, I compiled a detailed log of what I'd observed. 5 different women in 8 days, payments ranging from $200 to $400 per encounter, total spending of at least $500 in 1 week, more than some families spend on groceries in a month. I also did something I hated myself for. I searched David's room. I waited until he left for work on Monday morning, then went through his belongings like a detective investigating a crime scene. What I found made everything worse. In his nightstand drawer, underneath some old electronics manuals, I found a small notebook, page after page of names, phone numbers, descriptions, and ratings. Ashley, blonde, tall, $300, good. Monica, brunette, young, $250, okay. Crystal, redhead, older, $400, excellent. There were at least 30 different names in that notebook, 30 women. I sat on David's bed, the same bed where Margaret used to read him bedtime stories, and felt like I was drowning. This wasn't a recent development triggered by his divorce. This was an established pattern, a secret life he'd been living for God knows how long. Maybe even while he was married to Jessica. That thought hit me like a physical blow. Had David's marriage ended because of this? Had Jessica discovered what he was doing? Was that why she'd seemed so angry during the divorce proceedings? Why she'd refused David's attempts at reconciliation? I found more evidence in his laptop bag. Credit card statements showing cash advances totaling thousands of dollars over the past 6 months. Bank statements showing regular ATM withdrawals of $300, $400, always late at night, always from the same location, a 7-Eleven near Colfax Avenue, where several of the women in his notebook apparently worked the streets. My son wasn't just visiting prostitutes occasionally. He was frequenting street-level sex workers, the most vulnerable women in the trade, often enough to have established relationships with them. I'd thought about the young woman with the track marks, about how skinny she'd looked, how scared. Someone's daughter, maybe someone's mother, selling her body to feed a drug habit, while my son handed over money that should have been going toward rebuilding his life. That evening, David came home with takeout Chinese food, an obvious attempt to avoid eating dinner with me. He'd been doing that more often lately, as if he sensed my growing suspicion. "They got you General Tso's chicken," he said, setting containers on the kitchen counter. "Your favorite." It was my favorite, or it had been, before I learned what my son was doing with his evenings. "David," I said as we ate in uncomfortable silence, "how are you doing? Really doing, I mean." He looked up from his fried rice, surprised by the question. "I'm fine, Dad. Why? You seem distant lately, distracted." "Just work stress," he said quickly. "Big project deadline coming up." Another lie. I'd looked up his company online and called the main number, pretending to be a vendor trying to reach him. The receptionist told me David had taken several sick days recently and had been arriving late most mornings. No mention of any major project deadlines. "David, if you were struggling with something, really struggling, you'd tell me, right? You'd let me help?" For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Vulnerability, maybe, or fear. But then his walls went back up. "I'm fine, Dad, really. You don't need to worry about me. I'm your father. Worrying about you is part of the job description." He almost smiled at that. "Mom used to say the same thing. Your mother loved you very much. She'd want you to be happy, to be healthy." "I know." David pushed food around on his plate. "I miss her too." We finished dinner in silence. David retreated to his room early, claiming he had work to catch up on. I heard him making phone calls behind his closed door, and my stomach turned, knowing what those calls were probably arranging. At 10:30 p.m., he left the house. I didn't bother watching from the window this time. I knew what I'd see. Instead, I called Emily. "I found his notebook," I told her. "There are dozens of names, Emily, dozens." "Oh, God." Her voice was thick with emotion. "Poor David, and poor Dad having to deal with this alone. What if I can't help him? What if he doesn't want help? Dad, listen to me. David is sick. This is an addiction, just like alcoholism or drug addiction. It's not a moral failing, it's a disease that needs treatment. But like any addiction, the person has to want to get better. And if he doesn't," Emily was quiet for a long moment, "then you'll have to decide how much you're willing to enable his behavior by letting him continue living with you." The thought of kicking David out, of being alone in the house again, was almost unbearable. But the thought of continuing to provide him with a safe place to bring these women, to contribute to an industry that exploited vulnerable people, was equally unacceptable. "Emily, will you come for a visit soon? I think I need backup for this conversation." "I'll drive down this weekend," she promised. "We'll figure this out together, Dad. David is going to get through this. Our family is going to get through this." I wanted to believe her, but as I sat alone in my kitchen, listening for the sound of David's truck returning, I wasn't sure if the family Margaret and I had built could survive this revelation. Some secrets, once exposed, change everything forever, and I had a terrible feeling that David's secret was just the beginning. Emily arrived Saturday morning, driving straight through from Portland in her silver Honda. When I opened the front door and saw her standing there with her overnight bag and a box of Margaret's favorite donuts from the bakery near her house, I nearly broke down crying. She looked so much like her mother, the same dark hair, the same intelligent green eyes, the same way of tilting her head when she was concerned about something. At 31, Emily had the confidence and warmth that came from being good at helping people solve their problems. "Oh, Dad," she said, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like her vanilla perfume and the familiar scent of Portland rain. "I'm so sorry you've been dealing with this alone." David was still asleep. He'd come home around 2 a.m. with another woman, this one older, probably in her 50s, wearing too much makeup to cover the lines around her eyes. I'd watched from the sewing room window as money changed hands, as she left 25 minutes later counting bills under the streetlight. "He doesn't know you're coming," I told Emily, as we sat in the kitchen with coffee and donuts. "I thought it would be better if we could observe him first, see how he's acting." Emily nodded, pulling out a small notebook. "Tell me about his routine. When does he usually get up on weekends?" "Around 10 or 11. He'll shower, have coffee, maybe eat something. Then he usually disappears for most of the day, says he's running errands or meeting friends." "And you think he's—" "I don't know. Maybe meeting more women, maybe going to places where he finds them. I honestly don't know what he does during the day anymore." Emily made notes in her therapist's careful handwriting. "Dad, I need you to understand something. What we're dealing with isn't just about sex. Sex addiction is usually about control, about escape from emotional pain. David's been through a lot. The divorce, moving back home, Mom's death. This behavior might be his way of trying to feel something other than grief and failure. But why this? Why not drinking or gambling or any of the other ways people cope badly? Because this gives him complete control over another person, even if it's just for 20 minutes. He chooses who, when, how much to pay. In a life where he probably feels powerless, failed marriage, living with his father, career stagnation, this might be the only area where he feels like he's in charge." It made sense in a horrible way. David had always been a control freak, even as a child. When other kids played games with flexible rules, David needed everything spelled out in advance. When he and Jessica had problems in their marriage, he'd tried to solve them with spreadsheets and schedules rather than communication and compromise. "But he's hurting people," I said. "These women, some of them are barely adults, Emily. Some of them are obviously on drugs." "I know. And that's why we have to help him stop. People with sex addiction often escalate their behavior over time, seeking out riskier situations to get the same emotional relief. If we don't intervene now—" She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Things could get much worse. Around 10:30, we heard David moving around upstairs. Emily and I had agreed on a strategy. We'd act natural, let David think Emily was just visiting, and see how he behaved. Then when the right moment presented itself, we'd have our intervention. David came downstairs in his robe and pajama pants, hair sticking up on one side. When he saw Emily sitting at the kitchen table, his face lit up with genuine joy. "Em! What are you doing here?" He hugged his sister tight, and for a moment he looked like the old David, the loving brother, the good son. "Thought I'd drive down for the weekend," Emily said casually. "Missed you guys. How are the kids? How's Mark?" Emily filled him in on family news while I watched David's body language. He seemed relaxed, happy even. Nothing in his demeanor suggested the secret life I'd been witnessing. He was an excellent actor. Or maybe this was the real David, the one he used to be before whatever had gone wrong in his life. "You look tired," Emily observed. "Are you sleeping okay?" A flicker of something crossed David's face. "Yeah, fine. Just work stress." "Dad mentioned you've been working a lot of late nights." David glanced at me, and I saw a flash of suspicion in his eyes. Sometimes. You know how it is in tech. Deadlines don't care about your sleep schedule. Emily nodded sympathetically. I remember when Mark was pulling those crazy hours at his startup. It was hard on our relationship. Good thing we worked through it. The mention of relationship problems made David uncomfortable. He turned away to pour coffee, and I saw his shoulders tense. Speaking of relationships, Emily continued, are you seeing anyone, dating at all since the divorce? No, David said quickly, not ready for that yet. Another lie. If paying for sex wasn't dating, it was certainly a form of relationship, however twisted. We spent the morning together like a normal family, reading the newspaper, making pancakes, talking about Emily's kids and their upcoming school play. David seemed genuinely happy to have his sister there, and I found myself hoping maybe Emily's presence would be enough to snap him out of whatever destructive pattern he'd fallen into. But around 2 p.m., David announced he was going out. I promised a friend I'd help him move some furniture, he said, avoiding eye contact. Shouldn't take too long. Which friend? Emily asked innocently. Steve, from work. You don't know him. Want some help? I'm pretty good at lifting heavy things. No, it's just a small job. Besides, you should spend time with Dad. David left quickly, almost like he was escaping. Emily and I watched from the living room window as his truck disappeared down the street. He's lying, Emily said simply. Everything about his body language screamed deception. So what do? We wait for him to come home, and then we tell him we know. The wait was agonizing. Emily tried to distract me with stories about her kids, updates on her work with addiction patients, memories of Margaret. But my mind kept drifting to where David might be, what he might be doing. He came home at 6 p.m., just in time for dinner. No furniture-moving friend with him, no explanation for why the job had taken 4 hours. He looked exhausted and slightly on edge. How did the move go? Emily asked, as we sat down to the pot roast I'd made. Fine, David said shortly. Steve had more stuff than expected. That's always the way it is, Emily agreed. People never realize how much junk they've accumulated until they have to move it. David just nodded, focused intently on his food. After dinner, as we cleaned up, Emily caught my eye and nodded slightly. It was time. David, I said, as he was about to head upstairs, could you sit with us for a minute? Emily and I want to talk to you about something. He froze. What about? Just sit down, son, please. David reluctantly took a seat at the kitchen table. Emily sat across from him, and I took the chair next to him, close enough to offer support, far enough away that he wouldn't feel trapped. David, Emily began in her professional therapist voice, we know about the women. The color drained from David's face. For a moment, he looked like he might bolt from the room. Then his defenses kicked in. I don't know what you're talking about. Dad has security cameras, Emily said gently. He's seen the women you bring here at night. David turned to me with a look of such betrayal that it took my breath away. You've been spying on me? I left the camera on by accident, I said. But once I saw David, I had to know what was happening. This is unbelievable. David stood up abruptly. You're watching me like I'm some kind of criminal? Sit down, Emily said firmly. We're not done talking. I don't have to listen to this. This is my father's house, but I pay rent. You haven't paid rent in 3 months, I said quietly, and you won't look for your own apartment because you've been spending your money on prostitutes. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. David sat back down heavily, his face buried in his hands. We know about the notebook, Emily said. We know about the ATM withdrawals, the cash advances on your credit cards. David, this isn't just a few bad decisions. This is a pattern of destructive behavior. You went through my things? David's voice was muffled by his hands. I was worried about you, I said. I've been watching you destroy yourself for months, and I didn't understand why. David looked up and I saw tears in his eyes. You don't understand anything. Then help us understand, Emily said. Talk to us. Tell us what's really going on. Okay, what's going on is that my life is a complete disaster, David said, his voice breaking. My marriage failed. I'm 34 years old living with my father. I can't even afford my own apartment. I'm a failure at everything. That doesn't explain, I began. It explains everything, David exploded. Do you know what it's like to feel completely powerless? To feel like nothing you do matters, like you can't make anyone happy, like you're worthless? Emily and I exchanged glances. This was the real pain talking now. David, Emily said softly, paying for sex isn't going to fix those feelings. It's the only time I feel like I have any control, he admitted. The only time when someone does exactly what I want, when I get to choose how things go. But it's not real, I said. Those women don't care about you, they're just doing a job. I know that, David shouted. Of course I know that, but at least it's honest. At least I know exactly what I'm getting and what it costs. It's not like marriage, where you think you know someone and then they leave you for your best friend. The room went silent. Emily and I stared at David. Jessica left you for your best friend? Emily asked. David nodded miserably. Mike Thompson. They'd been having an affair for 6 months before I found out. So yeah, I have trust issues with women. At least when I pay for sex, everyone knows where they stand. Suddenly, everything made more sense. David's behavior wasn't just about feeling powerless. It was about feeling betrayed, about not being able to trust that any relationship was real. But understanding the reason didn't make the behavior acceptable. David, I said, I'm sorry about Jessica and Mike. That must have been devastating. But what you're doing now, it's not helping you heal. It's making things worse. How? He demanded. How is it making things worse? I'm not hurting anyone. It's a transaction between consenting adults. You're hurting yourself, Emily said, and you're contributing to an industry that exploits vulnerable women. Some of those women Dad saw are obviously struggling with addiction. That's not my fault. No, but giving them money to feed their drug habits isn't helping them either. David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know how to stop. Those 6 words broke my heart and gave me hope at the same time. He'd admitted he had a problem. That was the first step. We're going to help you, I said. Emily knows about addiction treatment. We're going to find you the best help available. What if I don't want help? What if I just want you to leave me alone? Then you'll have to find somewhere else to live, I said, and the words hurt coming out. I won't enable this behavior by providing you with a place to bring these women. David stared at me. You'd kick me out? I'd kick out the behavior. If you're willing to get help, to really work on changing, then you can stay here as long as you need, but I won't be an enabler. David looked back and forth between Emily and me, and I could see him weighing his options. Finally, he slumped forward in his chair. What kind of help? He asked. Emily pulled out her phone. There's a residential treatment program in Colorado Springs that specializes in sex addiction. It's expensive, but I can't afford expensive treatment, David interrupted. I've blown through most of my savings on... He gestured helplessly. I'll pay for it, I said immediately, whatever it costs. Dad, you can't afford... I have the life insurance money from your mother's policy. She'd want it used to help her son get better. Emily was already making notes. There's also outpatient therapy, support groups, intensive counseling. David, the important thing is that you're willing to try. David sat quietly for several minutes. Outside, I could hear the Johnson's sprinkler system starting up, the familiar sounds of suburban evenings settling around us. Those women, David said finally, some of them, they tell me things about their lives, about why they're doing this. A lot of them have kids they're trying to support. I know, Emily said gently. One girl, Melissa, she's only 19. She's trying to save money for nursing school. Her grandmother is raising her little brother because their parents died in a car accident. David's voice was thick with emotion. She shouldn't have to sell her body to pay for college. You're right, I said. She shouldn't. But giving her money this way isn't helping her reach her goals. It's keeping her trapped in a dangerous situation. I know. David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. God, I hate myself for what I've become. You haven't become anything, Emily said firmly. You're dealing with an addiction. It's an illness, not a character flaw. But like any illness, it requires treatment. David looked at me with eyes full of pain and shame. Dad, are you disgusted with me? The question hit me like a physical blow. Was I disgusted? I was certainly shocked, disappointed, heartbroken, but disgusted with my son. No, I said, and meant it. I'm heartbroken that you've been in so much pain, that you felt this was your only option. I'm worried about your health, your safety, your future. But David, you're my son. Nothing you could do would make me stop loving you. He started crying then, really crying, like he hadn't since he was a little boy. Emily moved to sit next to him, putting her arm around his shoulders the way she used to when they were children. We're going to get through this, she said. All of us, together. What if I can't change? David asked through his tears. What if this is just who I am now? It's not, I said with more conviction than I felt. The David I raised, the man who used to volunteer at the animal shelter and helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, that's who you really are. This other thing, this addiction, it's like a parasite that's been feeding off your pain. But it's not you. We talked for another hour, making plans. Emily would help David research treatment options. I would clean out the living room camera footage and delete everything I'd recorded. David deserved his privacy back once he was working on recovery. David would call in sick to work on Monday and start making appointments with counselors. There's one more thing, David said as we were wrapping up. Jessica, she doesn't know about this. The prostitutes started after our divorce. But there were other things during our marriage. Online stuff mostly. Chat rooms, webcam sites. She found out about some of it, and that's part of why she left. Did you tell her about Mike? Emily asked. She told me about Mike to justify the online stuff. Said she wouldn't have looked elsewhere if I'd been a better husband. David's voice was bitter. Maybe she was right. Infidelity is never justified by someone else's behavior, Emily said firmly. You both made choices that hurt your marriage, but that doesn't mean you can't learn from it and do better next time. Next time, David laughed humorlessly. Who's going to want to be with someone like me? Someone who sees the real you, I said. The David we know you can be again. That night, after Emily had gone to bed in her old room, and David had gone upstairs without leaving the house again for the first time in weeks, I sat alone in my living room. I looked at the couch where I'd watched my son make transaction after transaction with desperate women, and I felt a mixture of grief and hope. Tomorrow, we'd start the hard work of rebuilding David's life. There would be therapy sessions, difficult conversations, setbacks, and breakthroughs. It wouldn't be easy, and success wasn't guaranteed, but for the first time in months, I felt like we were moving forward instead of just surviving. I thought about Margaret, about what she would say if she were here. She'd probably remind me that loving someone doesn't mean enabling their destructive behavior, but it also doesn't mean giving up on them when they stumble. We raised him with good values, I whispered to her picture on the mantelpiece. Those values are still in there somewhere. We just have to help him find them again. Outside, Denver slept on around us, unaware that in one suburban house a family was beginning the long journey back to each other. 3 months later, I was sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Sarah Chen's office in downtown Denver, reading the same magazine article about retirement planning for the 3rd time. David had been attending individual therapy sessions twice a week since our family intervention, and today was our first joint session. The transformation in my son over those 3 months had been remarkable and heartbreaking in equal measure. He'd checked himself into the outpatient program Emily had found, attending group therapy sessions every evening and working with a specialist in sex addiction recovery. He'd also started attending Sex Addicts Anonymous meetings, following a 12-step program similar to Alcoholics Anonymous. But recovery hadn't been linear. There had been setbacks, nights when David disappeared for hours and came home ashamed and apologetic. There had been arguments, tears, moments when I wondered if we were fighting a losing battle. There had also been breakthroughs, days when I caught glimpses of the old David and slowly growing stretches of time when he seemed genuinely at peace. The hardest part for me had been learning how my own behavior might have contributed to his addiction. In family therapy sessions, Dr. Chen had helped me understand that David's need for control, his difficulty trusting relationships, and his shame around his sexuality had roots that went deeper than his divorce. "Mr. Hayes," the receptionist called, "Dr. Chen will see you and David now." David had been waiting in the therapy room for 15 minutes already, part of his new routine of taking responsibility for his own recovery. When I entered, he was sitting in one of the comfortable chairs near the window, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. Dr. Chen was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of Emily. Over the past months, she'd become a crucial ally in our family's healing process. "Robert," she greeted me warmly, "how are you feeling about today's session?" "Nervous," I admitted, taking the chair across from David. "But hopeful." "David has some things he wants to share with you," Dr. Chen said. "But first, how has the past week been for both of you?" David and I had started having regular check-ins, 10 minutes every evening where he could share how he was feeling, and I could express any concerns without judgment. It had been awkward at first, but it was gradually becoming more natural. "Better," I said. "David seems more present, more like himself." "I've been clean for 3 weeks," David said, and there was quiet pride in his voice. "No paid encounters, no online sites, no acting out behaviors." "How does that feel?" Dr. Chen asked. "Scary," David admitted, "but also relieving. Like I'm not carrying around this huge secret anymore." I felt a surge of pride. 3 weeks might not seem like much to someone who'd never dealt with addiction, but I'd learned it was a significant milestone. "David," Dr. Chen prompted gently, "you wanted to talk to your father about some insights you've had in therapy." David shifted in his chair, looking nervous. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot about why I ended up where I did. The addiction, the lying, all of it. And I realize that part of it goes back to things that happened when I was younger." "What do you mean?" "Do you remember when I was 16 and you caught me looking at pornography on the computer?" I did remember. It had been an awkward moment. Margaret and I had decided to address it directly but calmly, explaining that curiosity was normal, but that pornography wasn't a realistic representation of relationships. "Your mother and I tried to handle that appropriately," I said. "You did," David agreed. "But do you remember what you said about the women in those images?" I thought back, trying to recall the conversation. "I think I said something about them being someone's daughters, that they deserved respect." "You said they were damaged goods," David said quietly. "You said that only women with serious problems would do that kind of work. and that I should feel sorry for them but never get involved with that type of woman. The words hit me like a slap. I didn't remember saying that, but I could imagine it. It sounded like something I might have said in 1992, trying to discourage my teenage son from developing unhealthy attitudes about sex. David, I'm not blaming you, Dad, David interrupted. Dr. Chen has helped me understand that addiction is complex, that there isn't one cause. But that conversation stuck with me. It made me feel like there were two types of women. Good women who deserved love and respect, and bad women who were damaged and available. Dr. Chen leaned forward. How did that belief system affect your adult relationships? It made me put Jessica on a pedestal, David explained. She was a good woman, so I had to be perfect for her. I couldn't express any sexual desires that seemed too intense or selfish. And when our marriage had problems, when she cheated, it shattered my belief system. If she wasn't really good, then maybe there were no good women. Maybe they were all available for the right price. I felt sick. My attempt to protect my teenage son from objectifying women had somehow contributed to him doing exactly that as an adult. Robert, Dr. Chen said, how are you processing this? I'm horrified, I said honestly. I was trying to teach him to respect women, and instead I created categories that led to him exploiting them. The important thing, David said, is that I understand it now. I understand that women aren't categories. They're individuals with their own stories, their own reasons for making choices. Some of the women I was involved with were supporting families, some were struggling with addiction, some were just trying to survive. None of them deserved to be treated as disposable. What does that understanding mean for your recovery? Dr. Chen asked. It means I need to rebuild my whole relationship with sexuality and intimacy, David said. In group therapy, I've learned that healthy sexuality is about mutual respect, communication, and genuine connection. It's not about control or transaction. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a maturity that hadn't been there before. The shame and anger that had defined him for months were being replaced by self-awareness and determination. There's something else, David continued. I've been thinking about dating again. Not now, Doctor. Chen says I need at least 6 months of solid recovery before I should consider a relationship, but eventually. How do you feel about that? I asked. Terrified, he admitted with a laugh, but also hopeful. I'm learning what a healthy relationship looks like, how to communicate my needs without trying to control the outcome. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. David has been doing excellent work in understanding his patterns and developing new coping strategies. What about living arrangements? I asked. It was a question that had been hanging over us for weeks. David and Dr. Chen exchanged a look. Actually, Dad, I've been thinking about that. I found an apartment downtown near work. Nothing fancy, but it's in my budget and it has good public transportation access for getting to meetings. My heart sank a little. I'd grown accustomed to having David home again, to feeling like we were rebuilding our relationship. But, David continued, I was hoping we could still have our Sunday dinners. Maybe you could teach me some of Mom's recipes. I realize I never learned to cook properly. I'd like that, I said, feeling emotional. I'd like that very much. And Dad, I want to pay you back for the therapy costs. It might take a while, but I will pay you back. That's not necessary. It is necessary, David said firmly. Taking responsibility for my choices includes taking financial responsibility. Doctor. Chen says it's an important part of making amends. Dr. Chen smiled. David has also been working on his Step 4 inventory, taking a fearless moral inventory of his past actions and their impact on others. What does that involve? I asked. Making amends where possible, David explained. I've written letters to Jessica, apologizing for my part in our marriage problems. I'm not sending them unless she wants to hear from me, but writing them helped me understand how my behavior affected her. And the women? I asked quietly. David's face grew serious. That's more complicated. Dr. Chen and I have talked about it extensively. Direct contact could be harmful to them, especially if they're still working in the industry. Instead, I've been volunteering at a non-profit that helps women transition out of sex work. I felt a surge of pride. Really? 2 hours every Saturday at the Colfax Women's Center. I help with job interview preparation, resume writing, basic computer skills. It's my way of giving back, of doing something constructive instead of destructive. How does that feel? Good. Really good. These women are so much stronger and more resilient than I ever gave them credit for. They're not victims or damaged goods. They're survivors working to build better lives. Dr. Chen looked at her notes. Robert, how are you feeling about David's progress? Proud, I said immediately, and relieved. For months, I felt like I was losing my son. Now I feel like I'm getting to know a better version of him. What about your own recovery? She asked. My own recovery. That was something I'd learned about through this process, that families of addicts need their own healing too. I've been attending Al-Anon meetings, I said, learning how to support David without enabling him, how to take care of my own emotional needs. It's helped me understand that I can't control David's choices, but I can control my own responses to them. And how has that changed your relationship? I thought about it. I'm less anxious. Before, I was constantly watching for signs that David was struggling, trying to anticipate problems. Now, I trust that he'll come to me if he needs help, and I focus on being present when we're together rather than worrying about what might happen. David smiled. It's made our relationship more honest. I don't feel like I have to pretend everything is perfect, and Dad doesn't feel like he has to fix everything. Speaking of honesty, Dr. Chen said, David has something he wants to ask you. David took a deep breath. Dad, would you be willing to come to one of my SAA meetings, just to observe, to understand what the program is like? You don't have to participate, just see what's helping me. The request surprised me. Is that allowed? There are open meetings specifically for family members and friends, Dr. Chen explained. It might help you understand the ongoing nature of David's recovery. Of course, I said. When? Thursday night, 7 o'clock at the community center on Alameda. We spent the rest of the session talking about practical matters, David's moving timeline, our new communication patterns, and plans for the upcoming holidays. It would be our first Christmas without Margaret, and we were all dreading it. I have an idea about Christmas, David said as we were wrapping up. What if we volunteer together? The Women's Center is serving Christmas dinner to current and former sex workers who don't have family support. We could help serve food, maybe just be present for women who might otherwise spend the holiday alone. The suggestion was so thoughtful, so focused on others rather than himself, that I felt tears welling up. I think your mother would love that idea, I said. I think so too. After the session, David and I walked to our cars together. The Denver afternoon was crisp and clear, the kind of day that makes you grateful to be alive. Dad, David said as we reached his truck, I want you to know something. Even during the worst of my addiction, even when I was lying to you every day, I never stopped being grateful that you let me come home. A lot of people don't have that kind of safety net. You're my son, I said simply. This is your home for as long as you need it. I know, and that's what made it possible for me to get better, knowing that you loved me even when I wasn't very lovable. 2 weeks later, I attended my first SAA meeting. I sat in the back of a circle of folding chairs in a church basement, listening to men and women of all ages share their stories of addiction and recovery. David introduced me simply as my father, who's been supporting my recovery. And I felt a pride that had nothing to do with accomplishment and everything to do with love. The stories I heard that night were heartbreaking and inspiring in equal measure. Men who'd lost marriages, jobs, and custody of their children due to their addiction. Women who'd used sex as a way to cope with childhood trauma. People from all walks of life who'd found themselves trapped in behaviors they couldn't control. But I also heard stories of hope, people celebrating months or years of recovery, marriages rebuilt, families reunited, people who'd found new purpose in helping others heal from the same wounds that had nearly destroyed them. When it was David's turn to share, he talked about gratitude. Gratitude for his family's support, for his therapist, for the program that was helping him rebuild his life. 6 months ago, he said, I thought I was beyond help. I thought I'd destroyed everything good about myself. But recovery has taught me that it's never too late to change, never too late to become the person you're meant to be. After the meeting, several people approached me to thank me for coming, to tell me how much family support meant to people in recovery. An older woman named Martha, who'd been in the program for 3 years, pulled me aside. Your son is lucky to have you, she said. My family couldn't handle my addiction. They wrote me off, said I was hopeless. Having someone who believes in you makes all the difference. On the drive home, David and I stopped for coffee at a diner near the house. It was something we'd never done before, just sat together without agenda, talking about whatever came to mind. How was that for you? David asked. The meeting? Eye-opening, I said honestly. I had no idea how common sex addiction is, how many people struggle with it. Most people don't talk about it. There's so much shame around it, especially for men. Society expects us to want sex all the time, so admitting that your relationship with sex is unhealthy feels like admitting you're not really a man. Is that how you felt? For a long time, yeah. Even when I knew my behavior was destructive, I thought seeking help would make me look weak or perverted. I thought about all the times over the years when I'd made jokes about men's sexual appetites, when I'd reinforced the idea that men's desire was uncontrollable. How many times had I unknowingly contributed to David's shame? I'm sorry, I said, for all the times I reinforced unhealthy ideas about masculinity and sexuality. I was doing what I thought was normal, but I can see now how it might have made it harder for you to ask for help. David reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Dad, you're doing something now that's much more important than being perfect in the past. You're showing up. You're learning. You're changing. 6 months later, David moved into his downtown apartment. Emily and her family came to help with the move, and we made it a celebration rather than a goodbye. David's new place was small, but comfortable, and he decorated it with family photos and artwork from his volunteer work at the Women's Center. That first Sunday, he invited me over for dinner. I was amazed by how much he'd learned to cook. He'd made Margaret's recipe for pot roast, and while it wasn't quite as good as hers, it was made with love. I have some news, David said as we cleaned up after dinner. Good news, I hope. I think so. There's someone I'd like you to meet. Her name is Sarah, and she's special. My heart jumped. Someone from your recovery program? No, someone from work. We've been talking for a few weeks, just as friends. She knows about my addiction, about my recovery. I told her early on because Dr. Chen says honesty has to be the foundation of any healthy relationship. And she's okay with it? David smiled. She said everyone has things they're working on. She's in Al-Anon herself. Her ex-husband was an alcoholic. She understands that recovery is a lifelong process. When do I get to meet her? Next Sunday? I thought maybe you could cook for us this time. She's excited to meet the father who helped save his son's life. I didn't save your life, David. You did that yourself. No, Dad. You saved my life the night you found that camera footage and decided to fight for me instead of giving up on me. Everything good that's happened since then started with your decision to love me through the worst thing I'd ever done. A year and a half after that terrible night when I discovered David's secret, I attended his one-year SAA anniversary meeting. He spoke to the group about his journey, about the family support that had made recovery possible, about the new life he was building. Sarah was there, sitting next to me in the family section. She was everything I'd hoped for David, kind, intelligent, supportive of his recovery, while maintaining her own independence. They'd been dating for 6 months, taking things slowly, building their relationship on the foundation of honesty and mutual respect that David had learned in therapy. When I was in the depths of my addiction, David told the group, I thought love was something you purchased or manipulated or controlled. Recovery has taught me that real love is something you nurture, something you give freely, something that grows stronger when it's based on truth rather than fantasy. He looked at me and Sarah as he spoke, and I felt Margaret's presence in that room as strongly as if she'd been sitting beside me. Our son had found his way back to the values we'd tried to instill in him. He'd become the man she'd always believed he could be. That night, as I drove home through the familiar streets of Denver, I thought about the camera that had started it all. What if I hadn't left it on that night? What if I'd never discovered David's secret? Would he have eventually found his way to recovery on his own? Or would he have spiraled deeper into addiction until it destroyed everything he cared about? I'd never know the answer to that question, but I was grateful for the accident that had forced us to confront the truth. Sometimes the worst discoveries lead to the most important conversations. Sometimes love means holding someone accountable. Sometimes the most painful revelations open the door to the deepest healing. David was going to be okay. Our family was going to be okay. And Margaret, wherever she was, could rest easy, knowing that the son she'd raised with such love and hope had found his way back to the light. David and Sarah's wedding took place in our backyard, the same yard where Margaret had grown her roses and where David had played as a child. It was a small ceremony. Family, close friends, and several people from David's recovery community who had become like family to us. As I walked David down the aisle, his request since Margaret couldn't be there to do it, I thought about how much we'd all grown. David was now 2 years sober and working as a volunteer coordinator at the non-profit where he'd started as a helper. Sarah had become the daughter Margaret and I had always wanted, and she'd brought her own children from her previous marriage into our family. Emily officiated the ceremony, having become ordained online for the occasion. During the vows, David promised Sarah not just love and fidelity, but continued commitment to his recovery and personal growth. I promise to be honest with you always, he said, even when the truth is difficult. I promise to do the work necessary to be the partner you deserve, and to never stop growing into the man I'm meant to be. After the ceremony, as we celebrated with cake and dancing on the same patio where Margaret and I had shared 43 anniversaries, David pulled me aside. "Dad, I have something for you." He handed me a wrapped package. Inside was a framed photo of Margaret holding baby David in the hospital, along with a note written in David's careful handwriting. "To the Father who never gave up on me, who loved me through my worst moments, and who taught me that it's never too late to become the person you're meant to be. Thank you for showing me what unconditional love looks like. I promise to pass it on to my own family. Love, David." As I read those words, surrounded by the laughter and love of our growing family, I realized that Margaret had been right all along. We had raised him with good values. Sometimes those values get buried under pain and addiction and poor choices, but they never truly disappear. Love, patience, and the willingness to fight for someone even when they can't fight for themselves, these things can bring anyone back from the brink. The camera that accidentally revealed our family's darkest secret had ultimately led us to our greatest healing, and I would always be grateful for that terrible, wonderful night when everything changed.